The halls of Westwood Prep buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos. Locker doors slammed, friends called out greetings, and teachers hurried to their classrooms with coffee cups in hand. It was just another day for everyone except Antonio Ricci, who stood at the entrance, school map clutched tightly in his hand. Antonio took a deep breath, straightening his navy blue jacket. At 16, he was used to being the new kid. His father's business meant they moved every few years, but this time was different. His father, Dominic Ricci, had promised this would be their last move. They were putting down roots in this quiet suburban town, far from the chaos of Chicago. "You got this," Antonio whispered to himself, adjusting the strap of his backpack. He'd learned long ago that first impressions mattered. Don't stand out, don't draw attention, and most importantly, never let anyone know who his father really was. The hallway felt longer than it looked on the map. Antonio checked his schedule again. First period, advanced chemistry, room 203. He glanced at the room numbers as he walked, ignoring the curious stares from groups of students. Being the new kid was one thing. Being the new kid with brown skin in a mostly white school was another. Antonio had inherited his mother's rich complexion and dark curly hair, a beautiful blend of his father's Italian heritage and his mother's Dominican roots. It had never been an issue in Chicago, where their neighborhood was a melting pot of cultures. But here in this wealthy suburb, he already felt the weight of being different. He found room 203 and slipped in quietly, hoping to grab a seat near the back. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose, noticed him immediately. "Ah, you must be our new student," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Antonio Ricci, correct?" 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at him. Antonio nodded, gripping the strap of his backpack tighter. "I'm Ms. Wilson. Why don't you tell the class a little about yourself?" This was exactly what he didn't want. Antonio cleared his throat. "I just moved here from Chicago. Not much to tell, really." Ms. Wilson waited, as if expecting more, then pointed to an empty seat in the front row. "Well, welcome to Westwood. You can sit there next to Tyler." Tyler, a lanky boy with sandy hair, barely glanced up as Antonio took the seat beside him. As Ms. Wilson turned to write on the whiteboard, Antonio heard whispers from behind. "Bet he's here on scholarship. Probably diversity outreach." Antonio kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched. He'd learned long ago not to react. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Never show them what you're thinking, son. The moment they know they've got to you, you've already lost." By lunchtime, Antonio had a decent feel for Westwood Prep. The school screamed money. From its manicured grounds to the student parking lot filled with luxury cars that kids his age had no business driving. In his previous schools, Antonio had always found his group quickly, usually other kids who existed on the fringes. But here, the invisible lines between social groups seemed impossible to cross. He found an empty table near the back of the cafeteria and unpacked the lunch his father's housekeeper had prepared. His father had insisted they keep certain traditions even in this new place. The container held his favorite, his grandmother's recipe for chicken parmigiana with a side of pasta. The familiar smell brought a small smile to his face. "That smells amazing," said a voice breaking into his thoughts. Antonio looked up to see a girl standing across from him, lunch tray in hand. She had bright hazel eyes and wore a camera around her neck. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, not waiting for an answer before sliding onto the bench across from him. "I'm Lynn, photographer for the school paper." "Antonio," he replied, surprised by her directness. "The new kid from Chicago." Lynn nodded. "News travels fast here. Small pond, lots of bored fish." She took a bite of her sandwich, eyeing his lunch. "Your mom make that? Looks way better than cafeteria food." "My dad's housekeeper," Antonio said before he could stop himself. He usually avoided mentioning anything that might hint at his family's wealth. Lynn raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Instead, she pulled out her camera. "Mind if I get your picture for the new student spotlight?" "Actually, I'd rather not," Antonio said quickly. Lynn lowered her camera, studying him. "Camera shy? Or just trying to stay under the radar?" Before he could answer, a loud group approached their table. 5 boys, all wearing the same blue and gold Letterman jackets, surrounded them. The one in the center, clearly the leader, was tall with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confidence that only came from a lifetime of getting exactly what you wanted. Well, the boy said, leaning on the table. Lin Wong making friends with the new charity case. Lin rolled her eyes. Buzz off, Preston. Don't you have some puppies to kick or something? Preston ignored her, focusing on Antonio. So, Chicago, huh? What brings your family to our little town? Your dad get a job as a gardener around here? Antonio felt heat rise to his face, but kept his expression neutral. Something like that. Preston's friends snickered. One of them, a stocky boy with a buzz cut, leaned closer. Hey, Preston, maybe his dad works for your dad. Didn't yours just hire new help for the estate? Antonio's hand tightened around his fork. If they only knew who his father was, what his father was capable of. But that was precisely what he couldn't let slip. His father had been clear. At Westwood, they were just a normal family. Dominic Ricci was just a businessman who had made good investments. Nothing more. Actually, Antonio said calmly, my father owns an import business. It wasn't entirely a lie. Among his legitimate businesses, his father did import Italian wines and olive oils. The other things that came in those shipments weren't on any manifest. Preston's smile turned calculating. An import business? How quaint. He straightened up. Word of advice, new kid. Westwood has a certain standard. Some people fit in, some don't. Figure out which one you are quick, and things will go smoother. As they walked away, Preston deliberately bumped Antonio's shoulder, causing him to drop his fork. The group laughed as they moved to a table in the center of the cafeteria. Ignore them, Lynn said, glaring after the boys. Preston Thompson is our resident jerk. His dad's the mayor, so he thinks he owns the place. Antonio picked up his fork, carefully controlling his breathing the way his father had taught him. It's fine. I've dealt with worse. Lynn looked skeptical. Maybe, but Preston has a way of finding people's buttons. And he especially loves targeting anyone who's different. The unspoken word hung between them. Antonio knew what she meant. In a school that was overwhelmingly white and wealthy, he stood out. Not just because of his skin color, but because he was an unknown quantity. In his father's world, unknowns were dangerous. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. As Antonio gathered his things, Lynn touched his arm. Seriously, watch out for Preston and his crew. They've made life hell for kids for less than being new. Antonio gave her a small smile. Thanks for the warning. As he headed to his next class, Antonio felt Preston's eyes following him. He'd faced bullies before. Rich kids who thought money made them untouchable. What those kids never realized was that there were different kinds of power in the world. His father had taught him that lesson early. Still, Antonio had hoped this time would be different. His father had promised a normal life here. Just once he wanted to be a regular teenager, not the son of Dominic Ricci, the man whose name made hardened criminals tremble. By the end of the day, word had spread about the confrontation at lunch. As Antonio walked to his locker, he noticed how conversation stopped when he passed, how eyes followed him with curious stares. His locker was covered in crude drawings and words, the marker still fresh enough to smudge when he touched it. The message was clear. Go back where you came from. Antonio stared at it for a long moment, then calmly opened the locker and gathered his books. As he closed it, he saw Lynn watching from down the hall, her camera hanging unused around her neck, concern written on her face. He gave her a small nod to show he was okay, then headed for the exit. Outside, the sleek black car was already waiting, his father's driver standing beside it, scanning the crowd with practiced eyes. Everything good, Mr. Ricci? The driver asked as he opened the door. Antonio slid into the back seat, dropping his backpack on the floor. Everything's fine, Ray. As the car pulled away from Westwood Prep, Antonio looked back at the imposing building. His father had chosen this town carefully, believing it would be safe. A place where no one would know the Ricci name or what it meant in certain circles. Antonio leaned back against the leather seat, wondering what his father would say if he knew what had happened today. Dominic Ricci had built his empire on respect, demanded it, commanded it, and when necessary enforced it with ruthless efficiency. But his father had also taught him patience. The smart man watches, waits, and chooses his moment, he often said. So that's what Antonio would do: watch, wait, learn the rules of this new place, and hope that Preston Thompson never discovered who he really was, the son of the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast. Antonio didn't tell his father about the incident at school. When Dominic asked about his first day over dinner that evening, Antonio just shrugged and said it was fine. Their sprawling new house still felt empty. The furniture too new, the rooms too quiet without his mother's laughter filling them. She had passed away 3 years ago, and sometimes Antonio still expected to hear her voice calling him for dinner. Just fine, Dominic pressed, cutting into his steak with precision. His father did everything with precision. No trouble? Nothing I can't handle, Antonio replied, meeting his father's gaze. They had an understanding. Antonio would never lie to his father, but there were things he preferred to deal with himself. Dominic studied his son for a moment, then nodded. Good. Remember what I told you? Keep my head down, focus on school, stay out of trouble, Antonio finished. The Ricci family mantra for public life. I know, Dad. This place is a fresh start for us, Dominic said, his voice softening slightly. No old business, no old enemies. Just a normal life. Antonio nodded, though he wondered if his father actually believed that was possible. The Ricci name carried weight, even if no one in this town knew it yet. Some things couldn't be erased with a change of address. The next morning, Antonio arrived at school early, hoping to clean his locker before others saw the graffiti. But when he got there, he found it had already been cleaned. Only faint smudges remained where the cruel words had been. I got here at 7, Lynn said, appearing beside him. Mr. Chen let me in early. Told him I had newspaper stuff to do. Antonio stared at her, surprised. You didn't have to do that. Lynn shrugged, adjusting her camera strap. Call it enlightened self-interest. If I help you now, maybe you'll give me an exclusive interview later when you're famous or something. Despite himself, Antonio smiled. I have no plans to be famous. That's what they all say, Lynn replied with a grin. She glanced down the hall. Heads up. Preston alert. Antonio turned to see Preston and 2 of his friends walking toward them. Unlike yesterday, Preston ignored Antonio completely, brushing past as if he didn't exist. Somehow that felt more deliberate than the confrontation. That's weird, Lynn muttered. Usually he doesn't miss a chance to be awful. Throughout the morning, Antonio noticed the same pattern. Preston and his friends would appear, but instead of direct harassment, they pretended Antonio was invisible. It was a different kind of bullying, isolation rather than confrontation. By lunchtime, Antonio had a better understanding of the school's social landscape. Preston's group ruled the social hierarchy, backed by wealth and family connections. Most students either wanted to be in their circle or were too afraid to challenge them. Antonio spotted Lynn at the same table as yesterday and headed her way, but before he could reach her, a tall boy with glasses intercepted him. You're Antonio, right? From Chicago? The boy stuck out his hand. I'm Theo. Lynn mentioned you. Said you might need some friends who aren't, terrible people. Theo led Antonio to the table where Lynn sat with 2 other students, a girl with short purple hair and a tall boy wearing a basketball jersey. Meet the misfits, Theo announced. This is Zara. He gestured to the purple-haired girl. And that's Diego. Charming introduction, Zara said dryly. He means we're the only people in this school with functioning moral compasses. Or just the only ones stupid enough to defy the Preston Thompson social order, Diego added with a grin. I'm only safe because Coach would kill him if he messed with his starting point guard. Antonio sat down, feeling oddly at ease for the first time since arriving at Westwood. So you guys are like the Resistance or something? Lynn laughed. More like the documentation. I report on Preston's reign of terror in the school paper. Well, as much as I can without getting shut down. Theo codes the digital edition and helps me dig up dirt. I just play basketball and look pretty, Diego said. And I provide the style and charm, Zara added, flipping her purple hair. Antonio smiled, unpacking his lunch. For a moment he could almost believe he was just a normal kid making normal friends. Then he saw Preston watching him from across the cafeteria, eyes narrowed with calculation. After lunch, Antonio headed to his locker to grab his history textbook. The hallway was nearly empty, most students already in class. As he rounded the corner, he saw Preston and his 2 closest friends, the stocky one called Brett and a taller one named Tyler, waiting by his locker. Antonio considered turning around, but that would mean being late to class. Taking a deep breath, he approached his locker. Hey, Chicago, Preston said, his voice falsely friendly. We didn't get off to a great start yesterday. Antonio said nothing, reaching for his locker combination. I'm talking to you, Preston continued, his tone hardening. He slapped his hand against the locker, blocking Antonio's access. Didn't your parents teach you any manners? Antonio met Preston's gaze. I need to get to class. Brett stepped closer. You think you're better than us or something? Coming in here hanging out with the freaks? Look, Antonio said calmly. I don't want any trouble. Preston laughed. Hear that, guys? He doesn't want trouble. His smile vanished. Well, maybe trouble wants you. In one quick motion, Preston knocked Antonio's books from his hands, sending them scattering across the floor. Antonio didn't react, didn't blink. He'd learned long ago that showing fear or anger only encouraged bullies. What's wrong with you? Tyler asked, looking unsettled by Antonio's calm. Say something. Antonio bent down to pick up his books. As he reached for his history text, Preston's foot came down on his hand, pressing just hard enough to hurt without leaving a mark. You don't belong here, Preston said quietly. This isn't your world. The sooner you figure that out, the better. The pressure increased slightly. Antonio felt his father's signet ring digging into his finger. The ring his father had given him on his 16th birthday. A symbol of their family legacy. For a brief moment, Antonio imagined what would happen if these boys knew who his father was. If they knew what happened to people who disrespected the Ricci family. The thought was both terrifying and darkly satisfying. Mr. Thompson, a sharp voice cut through the tension. Mrs. Patel, the history teacher, stood at the end of the hallway. What's going on here? Preston immediately removed his foot, his expression transforming into innocent concern. Just helping the new kid with his books, Mrs. Patel. He tripped. Mrs. Patel's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but Preston's smile never faltered. All of you get to class now. As the others hurried away, Mrs. Patel approached Antonio. Are you all right, Mr. Ricci? Antonio nodded, gathering his books. I'm fine. Thank you. She studied him for a moment. Those boys, they're not always kind to newcomers. Especially, she stopped herself, especially ones who look like me. Antonio finished. Mrs. Patel sighed. If you ever need to talk, my door's open. In history class, Antonio could feel Preston's friends glaring at him. News of Mrs. Patel's intervention had clearly irritated them. When the bell rang, Antonio hurried out, wanting to avoid another confrontation. But as he headed to his next class, Tyler deliberately bumped into him, knocking him against the lockers. This isn't over. Chicago, Tyler muttered before disappearing into the crowd. By the end of the day, Antonio's resolve was wearing thin. As he headed to his locker one last time, he found it covered with sticky notes. Each one had a single word: leave. Antonio calmly removed each note, balled them up, and threw them away. As he did, he noticed Lynn watching from nearby, her camera raised. She lowered it when she saw him looking. Evidence, she explained, walking over. For when they eventually cross a line and I can finally get them suspended. Has that ever worked? Antonio asked. Lynn shrugged. Not yet. Preston's dad plays golf with the principal. But someday they'll mess up big enough that even connections won't save them. Outside, Ray was waiting with the car. As Antonio approached, he noticed Ray's posture stiffen slightly, his eyes tracking something behind Antonio. Got yourself a shadow? Mr. Ricci, Ray said quietly as he opened the door. Antonio glanced back to see Preston watching from the school steps, taking in the sleek black car, the driver, the obvious signs of wealth that Antonio had tried to downplay. As Ray pulled away from the curb, Antonio felt a knot forming in his stomach. Preston had just realized that the charity case wasn't what he appeared to be. And somehow Antonio knew that would only make things worse. At home, Antonio found his father in his study, on the phone speaking rapid Italian. Dominic waved him in, finishing his call. How was school? Dominic asked, studying his son's face. Antonio hesitated. It's getting interesting. Dominic raised an eyebrow. Interesting how? Before Antonio could answer, Maria, their housekeeper, appeared at the door. Mr. Ricci, there's someone at the gate. The mayor wants to welcome you to the neighborhood. Dominic smiled, rising from his desk. The mayor himself? How thoughtful. He clapped Antonio on the shoulder. Come, son. Let's greet our new neighbor properly. As they walked to the front door, Antonio felt a chill run down his spine. The mayor? Preston's father. This couldn't be a coincidence. Whatever game Preston was playing had just taken an unexpected turn. And Antonio had a feeling things were about to get much more complicated. Mayor Richard Thompson had a politician's smile, all teeth and no warmth. He stood in the Ricci's foyer, taking in the marble floors and crystal chandelier with poorly disguised surprise. "Dominic Ricci," Antonio's father said, extending his hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mayor Thompson." "Please, call me Richard," the mayor replied, shaking Dominic's hand firmly. "We're neighbors now, after all. I live just down the lake, the white colonial with the blue shutters." "Ah, a beautiful property." Dominic nodded. "I admired it when we were house hunting." Antonio watched this exchange with growing unease. His father was being charming, but Antonio knew the signs. The slight tightness around his eyes, the way he kept his right hand relaxed and ready. Dominic Ricci was assessing a potential threat. "And this must be your son." Mayor Thompson turned to Antonio. "I believe you've met my boy, Preston. He's in your grade at Westwood." "Yes, sir," Antonio replied politely. "We've met. Good, good." Preston mentioned the new student from Chicago. "Small world, isn't it?" The mayor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Import business, was it? Your father's work?" "Among other ventures," Dominic cut in smoothly. "Diversification is key in today's economy. Would you care for a drink, Richard? I have an excellent scotch that just arrived from Scotland." As the adults moved to Dominic's study, Antonio excused himself to finish homework. From his bedroom window, he could see the mayor's luxury car in the driveway. The unexpected visit felt calculated, as if Preston had reported back and his father had come to investigate. Antonio's phone buzzed with a text from Lynn. "Did you see what happened to Diego's locker today?" Before he could reply, another message appeared. Preston's crew spray-painted slurs all over it. Principal did nothing as usual. "We're meeting at Zara's tonight to plan our response. You in?" Antonio stared at the message. Getting involved meant choosing sides openly. But something about this felt different from the usual high school drama. It felt personal. He typed back, "Text me the address." Zara's house was nothing like Antonio had expected. Instead of a mansion like most Westwood kids lived in, it was a modest two-story in the older part of town. Inside, family photos lined the walls and the furniture was worn but comfortable. "My mom's a nurse at County," Zara explained when she saw Antonio looking around. "Dad's a professor at the community college. We're the scholarship outliers at Westwood." In Zara's basement, Theo and Lynn were already huddled around a laptop, while Diego paced back and forth. "They crossed a line," Diego said when Antonio entered, using those words targeting me because I'm Latino. "It's not just bullying anymore." "It never was just bullying," Lynn replied. "It's always been about who they think belongs at Westwood and who doesn't." Antonio took a seat on an old couch. "What exactly are you planning?" "Evidence," Theo said, turning the laptop toward Antonio. "Lynn's been documenting everything for months. The slurs, the vandalism, the accidents that only seem to happen to certain students. On screen, Antonio saw dozens of photos, lockers with hateful graffiti, screenshots of threatening texts, even a video of Preston tripping a girl wearing a hijab. The principal won't act because of Preston's dad, Lynn explained. But the school board might if we can show them this is systematic. We're also thinking bigger, Zara added. The local news, social media, make it impossible to ignore. Antonio frowned. That's going to make a lot of powerful people angry. You scared? Diego challenged. No, Antonio said quietly. I'm worried about blowback. These people have connections. So do we, Zara countered. My mom treats half the town. Theo's dad works at the tech company that employs most of Westwood's parents. Lynn's mom is on the city council. And my coach actually has a conscience, Diego added, plus a state championship record that makes him untouchable. Antonio nodded slowly. This wasn't Chicago, where power was measured in fear and loyalty. Here it was about community connections and public pressure. Different rules, but still a game he understood. What about you? Lynn asked. We've all got skin in this game. What's your stake? Antonio hesitated. Let's just say I understand what it's like when people decide you don't belong somewhere based on how you look. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Theo spoke up. So, are you with us? Antonio thought of his father's warnings to stay under the radar. Then he thought of Preston's foot on his hand, the hatred in his eyes. I'm in. The next morning, Antonio found his friends waiting for him at the school entrance. Something in their expressions told him something was wrong. What happened? He asked. Lynn wordlessly handed him her phone. On screen was a social media post from Preston, a photo of Antonio's house with the caption, Guess whose daddy is playing gangster with his import business? Chicago trash trying to buy their way in. Antonio felt his blood run cold. The comments were worse. Speculation about his family, crude jokes about how his father had made his money, racial slurs thinly veiled as just asking questions. There's more, Theo said grimly. They're planning something for the pep rally tomorrow. I overheard Brett and Tyler talking in the locker room. What kind of something? Antonio asked. Don't know details, Theo replied. But they mentioned your name and laughed about teaching lessons. Antonio nodded, his mind racing. His father had always taught him to anticipate attacks, to think steps ahead. We need to be ready. Throughout the day, Antonio noticed the whispers, the stares. Preston's post had spread like wildfire. Even teachers were looking at him differently. In chemistry, Ms. Wilson called on him repeatedly, as if trying to trip him up. During lunch, Preston and his crew made a show of walking past Antonio's table, making mock gangster signs and speaking in exaggerated accents. Hey, Tony Soprano, Brett called out.
Your daddy whack anybody lately?
Antonio kept his expression neutral, but inside a cold anger was building. They were not just attacking him now, but his family, his father's reputation. In Chicago, such disrespect would never go unanswered. After school, Antonio found Ray waiting with the car as usual. But today, Ray wasn't alone. Sitting in the back seat was Dominic Ricci. Get in, his father said when Antonio approached. We need to talk. Once they were driving, Dominic handed Antonio his tablet. On screen was Preston's social media post. Explain. Antonio took a deep breath. Preston Thompson, the mayor's son. He's been targeting me since day one because I'm not white. Dominic's expression didn't change. And you didn't tell me because? You said to handle my own problems, Antonio replied. To stay under the radar. This, Dominic gestured to the tablet, is not under the radar. They rode in silence for a moment before Dominic spoke again. The mayor came to welcome us, but he was really checking whether the rumors his son had heard were true. Whether we're connected. Antonio looked at his father. Are we? Connected here, I mean. Dominic's lips curved in a slight smile. We're businessmen, Antonio. We always have connections, he paused. Tell me about these friends of yours. Antonio explained about Lynn, Theo, Zara, and Diego. About their plan to expose Preston and the school's pattern of ignored discrimination. Dominic listened carefully. You trust these kids? Yes, Antonio said without hesitation. They stood up for me when they didn't have to. Dominic nodded thoughtfully. Loyalty is rare. When you find it, you protect it. He looked out the window. This mayor, he's building a new development on the lake. Very exclusive. Very profitable. Antonio recognized that tone. His father was thinking several moves ahead. Dad, don't worry, Dominic said, patting Antonio's knee. I won't embarrass you. But perhaps it's time this town learned some respect. When they arrived home, Dominic retreated to his study and made several calls in Italian. Antonio caught fragments, something about permits, investors, zoning laws. The familiar rhythm of his father gathering information, assessing leverage points. That night, Antonio texted his friends. Tomorrow at the pep rally. Whatever they're planning, we need to be ready. Lynn replied first. Already on it. Got my camera ready and principal on speed dial. Theo. Hacked into the AV system. Can override anything they try to play on screens. Zara. My mom's friends with the superintendent. One call away if needed. Diego. Got the team watching your back. Preston messes with you, he messes with all of us. Antonio stared at his phone, a strange feeling washing over him. In Chicago, protection came from fear. Here, it came from friendship. Different, but just as powerful. Downstairs, he could hear his father still on the phone, his voice low and steady. Antonio knew that voice. It was the voice Dominic used when setting things in motion, when ensuring consequences would follow disrespect. Tomorrow would change everything. Preston and his friends thought they were dealing with an outsider they could intimidate. They had no idea they'd targeted the son of a man who had built an empire on making examples of those who crossed him. As Antonio prepared for bed, his phone buzzed one last time. An anonymous message with a video attachment. When he played it, his blood ran cold. It showed Preston and his friends planning their surprise for the pep rally, a public humiliation designed to force Antonio to leave Westwood for good. The video ended with Preston looking directly at the camera, smirking. The Ricci family thinks they can buy their way in. Tomorrow everyone learns what they really are. Antonio forwarded the video to his friends with a simple message. Change of plans. They want a show? Let's give them one. The morning of the pep rally. Antonio woke to the sound of his phone buzzing repeatedly. News alerts, text messages, and social media notifications flooded his screen. Confused, he opened the first message from Lynn. Check the local news now. Antonio quickly pulled up the news site on his tablet. The headline made his breath catch. Mayor Thompson's lake development project halted. Environmental concerns cited. The article detailed how permits had been suddenly revoked, with anonymous whistleblowers providing evidence of wetlands violations and zoning irregularities. Another text from Theo appeared. Did your dad do this? The timing is crazy. Antonio stared at his phone, unsure how to respond. He hadn't heard his father come in last night, but the coincidence seemed impossible. Before he could reply, a third message came in from Lynn. Whatever's happening, we stick to our plan. Meet at school early. 7:30, newspaper office. Downstairs, Antonio found his father calmly reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, coffee in hand. Dominic looked up as Antonio entered, his expression revealing nothing. You've seen the news, Dominic stated rather than asked. Antonio nodded. Dad, did you? I made some calls, Dominic said simply. Spoke to some people who were already concerned about that development. People who value the lake's ecosystem. He folded the newspaper carefully. Sometimes, Antonio, power isn't about what you do. It's about what you can prevent others from doing. The mayor will know it was you, Antonio said quietly. Dominic's smile was thin. He'll suspect, but he won't be able to prove anything. He checked his watch. You should eat. Big day at school, no? As Ray drove him to school, Antonio's mind raced. His father had struck the first blow in a way that was both public and untraceable. Classic Ricci strategy. But Antonio knew Preston wouldn't back down. If anything, this would make him more dangerous. The school halls buzzed with gossip about the mayor's project. Teachers spoke in hushed tones, and even Preston's usual crowd seemed subdued. Antonio headed straight for the newspaper office, where his friends were already waiting. There he is, Lynn said as Antonio entered, man of the hour. I had nothing to do with what happened to the mayor's project, Antonio said quickly. Diego raised an eyebrow. But your dad did? Antonio hesitated. He knows people. Convenient timing, Theo remarked, not unkindly. But we've got bigger problems. Look at this. He turned his laptop to show a private social media group where Preston and his friends were discussing their pep rally plans. They had created a video, splicing together images of Antonio, his house, and scenes from mob movies. They planned to play it on the gym's big screen during the rally, with Preston taking the microphone afterward to publicly expose the Ricci family. They actually think your dad's in the Mafia, Zara said, sounding incredulous. Like for real. Antonio kept his expression neutral. People watch too many movies. Either way, we can counter this, Lynn said firmly. Theo can block their video from playing. And I've got the principal and 3 school board members coming to the rally specifically to see our evidence of Preston's bullying campaign. And if that doesn't work? Antonio asked. Zara grinned. Plan B. She opened her backpack to reveal stacks of printed flyers. On them were screenshots of Preston's most offensive social media posts, text messages, and photos of vandalized lockers, all with Preston or his friends clearly identifiable. If the adults won't handle it, we take it to the student body. Antonio nodded slowly. Let's hope we don't need those. Throughout the morning classes, tension built. Antonio noticed Preston watching him, a smug smile playing on his lips. Clearly, he believed his plan was still secret. By lunchtime, the whole school was buzzing with anticipation for the afternoon pep rally. Preston keeps looking at you like he won something, Lynn whispered during their shared English class. He has no idea his project got tanked, does he? He will soon enough, Antonio replied. As they left class, Antonio's phone buzzed with a text from his father. Meeting with the school board president this afternoon. Discussed Westwood's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Very productive. Good luck at your rally. Antonio stared at the message. His father was moving pieces across the board with precision, creating leverage without seeming to apply pressure. It was masterful and a little terrifying. When the final bell rang, students streamed toward the gymnasium for the pep rally. Antonio and his friends positioned themselves strategically, Theo by the AV booth, Lynn near the principal, Zara and Diego with the flyers hidden in their bags, ready to distribute if needed. The gym filled quickly with excited students. The cheerleaders performed, followed by the mascot and coach's speech. Antonio watched Preston and his friends huddled near the side entrance, occasionally glancing his way and snickering. Finally, the student council president announced, "And now,
A special video presentation from our spirit committee."
Preston moved toward the stage, a flash drive in hand. But before he could reach the AV technician, the principal intercepted him. "Mr. Thompson," she said loudly enough for nearby students to hear, "I believe the program calls for the senior class president's speech next, not a video." Preston's confident smile faltered. "But we prepared a special presentation. It's about school spirit and belonging." The principal's expression remained firm. "Any presentation must be approved in advance. You know the rules." From his position near the bleachers, Antonio could see Lynn showing something on her phone to the school board members. Their expressions grew increasingly grave as they scrolled through what could only be the evidence she'd collected. Preston, meanwhile, was growing visibly frustrated. "My father donated the AV system. I think we can make an exception. Your father," said a new voice, "would want you to follow proper procedures." Mayor Thompson himself had entered the gym, his face tight with controlled anger. Behind him stood Dominic Ricci, looking completely at ease in an impeccably tailored suit. The gym fell silent as the mayor approached his son. "Preston, a word. Now." As they stepped aside, Antonio watched his father calmly approach the principal and school board members. Lynn caught Antonio's eye across the gym and gave him a subtle thumbs up. The pep rally resumed with the planned program, the mysterious video presentation forgotten. From the corner where the mayor had taken Preston, Antonio could see an intense conversation happening. Preston's face had gone from confused to shocked to pale with fear. When the rally ended, students filed out excitedly, unaware of the power struggle that had just occurred. Antonio waited for his friends by the gym doors. "What just happened?" Diego asked as they regrouped. "One minute we're about to go to war, the next minute the mayor shows up and everything stops." "My father happened," Antonio said quietly. "He met with the school board president this morning." "About what?" Zara asked. "About a very generous donation to the school's diversity initiative," came Dominic's voice as he approached the group, "and about the board's responsibility to ensure all students feel safe and respected at Westwood." Antonio made quick introductions. His friends seemed both intimidated and fascinated by his father, whose calm confidence filled the space around him. "The mayor and I had a productive conversation about our children's futures," Dominic continued. "He seems quite concerned about his son's behavior. Something about college applications and character references." Lynn's eyes widened. "You threatened his son's college prospects?" Dominic smiled slightly. "I merely pointed out that prestigious universities take community values very seriously, and that parents should know what their children are doing in their name." He checked his watch. "Antonio, I have a dinner meeting. Ray will take you and your friends wherever you'd like to go. Consider it a celebration." As Dominic walked away, Theo whistled low. "Your dad is intense." "You have no idea," Antonio murmured. Outside the gym, they spotted Preston with his father. The mayor was speaking sternly, his finger jabbing the air for emphasis. Preston looked smaller somehow, his usual arrogance replaced by something like fear. As they passed, Mayor Thompson paused his lecture. "Mr. Ricci," he called to Antonio. "My son has something to say to you." Preston stepped forward, his face flushed with humiliation. "I'm sorry for my behavior," he said mechanically. "It was inappropriate and disrespectful." Antonio studied him for a moment. The apology was clearly forced, but the consequences behind it were very real. "Apology accepted," he said finally. "Maybe things will be different now." As they walked away, Lynn nudged Antonio. "Your dad shut down a multi-million-dollar development and threatened Preston's future in one day." "Who exactly are you people?" Antonio smiled slightly. "Just a family that values respect." Later, as they celebrated at a local pizza place, Antonio watched his new friends laughing and planning the next issue of the school paper. For the first time since arriving in town, he felt like he belonged. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. Problem solved? Antonio typed back, "For now." "Thank you." The response came quickly. "Family protects its own, always. And Antonio, I'm proud of you for finding your own way to fight." Antonio smiled, tucking his phone away. His father had taught him that power came in many forms. In Chicago, it had been fear and force. But here, Antonio had found something different. Friendship, solidarity, and the quiet strength of standing up for what was right. He had a feeling Preston and his friends would think twice before targeting anyone at Westwood again. Not because they feared Antonio's family name, but because they now understood there were consequences to their actions. Consequences that even their privilege couldn't protect them from. The battle wasn't over, of course. These things never ended in a single day. But the balance of power had shifted, and for now that was enough. 2 weeks after the pep rally incident, Westwood Prep felt like a different school. The hallways still gleamed with privilege and tradition, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. Antonio noticed it first in the cafeteria. The rigid social boundaries had begun to blur, with students sitting at tables they wouldn't have approached before. Preston and his closest friends kept to themselves, their former swagger replaced by cautious glances and lowered voices. "Your latest article really struck a nerve," Antonio told Lynn as they sat with their friends at lunch. Lynn's expose in the school paper, Patterns of Privilege, confronting Westwood's culture of silence, had named no names but detailed specific incidents of discrimination that had gone unpunished. "The principal actually called me to her office to discuss it," Lynn said, unable to hide her pride. "Not to scold me, to ask for recommendations for the new Student Inclusivity Council." "Which you're now heading," Zara added, nudging Lynn playfully. "Along with Antonio here." Antonio smiled. The council had been his father's idea, or rather his father's suggestion to the school board during his generous donation meeting. Dominic had insisted Antonio be involved, saying it would look good on college applications. But Antonio knew his father well enough to recognize it for what it was, a position of influence. "The first meeting's tomorrow," Antonio reminded them. "We need concrete proposals, not just talk." "Already compiled a list," Theo said, sliding his laptop across the table, "including a complete review of the disciplinary system. Did you know Preston had 17 reported incidents before you got here, and not a single consequence?" "Not surprising," Diego muttered. "But things are changing. Coach actually benched Brett yesterday for calling me a name during practice. Said there's a new standard of behavior for the team." As they discussed plans for the council, Antonio spotted Preston entering the cafeteria alone. He looked different. The designer clothes and perfect hair remained, but the entitled confidence was gone. When their eyes met briefly across the room, Preston quickly looked away. "He still hasn't returned to form," Zara observed, following Antonio's gaze. "Whatever your dad and his dad discussed that day must have been serious." Antonio nodded but said nothing. He'd overheard enough of his father's phone calls to know that Mayor Thompson's political future had suddenly become complicated. Anonymous donors had pulled support from his re-election campaign, and the environmental review of his halted development had expanded to include all his previous projects. After school, Antonio found Ray waiting with the car as usual. But today Ray handed him an envelope as he got in. "From your father," Ray explained. "He said to read it before you get home." Inside the envelope was a newspaper clipping, a small article announcing that Mayor Thompson had withdrawn from the upcoming election, citing a desire to focus on family matters. Paperclipped to it was a note in his father's precise handwriting. "Actions have consequences. Remember this lesson." Antonio folded the article carefully. His father had dismantled the mayor's career without ever making a direct threat. It was both impressive and unsettling, a reminder of the power that flowed quietly beneath their normal life. At home, Antonio found his father in the kitchen, surprisingly, cooking dinner himself. Maria usually handled the meals, but tonight, Dominic stood at the stove, stirring a pot of his grandmother's pasta sauce recipe. "I saw the article," Antonio said, setting his backpack down. Dominic nodded, not looking up from his cooking. "Politics is a fragile business. One day you're untouchable, the next." He made a dismissive gesture. Like a house of cards, was it necessary? Antonio asked quietly. After what happened at school, Preston backed off. The mayor seemed to be handling him. Dominic turned to face his son, wooden spoon in hand. Some lessons need to be permanent, Antonio. That man raised his son to believe he could hurt people without consequences. I showed him otherwise. He tapped the spoon on the pot's edge. In our world, disrespect has a price. But we left that world behind, Antonio said. That's what you told me when we moved here. Dominic's expression softened slightly. We left Chicago. We left certain business practices, but who we are, that doesn't change with an address. He returned to stirring the sauce. Besides, I handled this like any legitimate businessman would. Political donations withdrawn, business deals reconsidered. All very legal. Antonio couldn't argue with that logic, though he knew the timing and coordination of those actions was anything but coincidental. His father had always operated in the gray spaces between legal and illegal, power and influence. Your mother would be proud of you, Dominic said suddenly, changing the subject. Standing up for your friends. Finding your own way to handle problems. The mention of his mother caught Antonio off guard. Dominic rarely spoke of her, the grief still too raw even years later. You think so? I know so, Dominic replied. She always said you had her heart in my head. A dangerous combination. He smiled slightly. This inclusivity council, it's a good idea. Better to change systems than just punish individuals. Antonio nodded, surprised by his father's insight. That's what Lynn says too. Smart girl, Dominic commented. All your friends are. You chose well. They ate dinner together, talking about Antonio's classes and the upcoming council meeting. For a brief time, they were just father and son, not a mafia boss and his heir. These moments had become more frequent since moving to Westwood, and Antonio treasured them. The next day at school, the first meeting of the Student Inclusivity Council took place. To Antonio's surprise, nearly 30 students showed up, not just his immediate friends, but others from all corners of Westwood's social landscape. Even more surprising was seeing Preston slip into the back row, sitting alone and saying nothing. As Lynn outlined their agenda, Antonio studied Preston. The mayor's son looked uncomfortable but determined, like someone facing a necessary but unpleasant task. When Lynn asked for volunteers for the Cultural Awareness Committee, Preston hesitantly raised his hand. After the meeting, as students filed out, Preston approached Antonio. Can we talk? He asked, his voice lacking its former arrogance. They stepped into an empty classroom. Preston stood awkwardly, struggling to find words. If this is another forced apology, Antonio began. It's not, Preston interrupted. My dad didn't send me. He's been dealing with his own problems. He paused. Your father is a very powerful man. Antonio said nothing, waiting. Look, Preston continued. I know what I did was wrong. Not just to you, but to a lot of students. I've had a lot of time to think about it lately. He gave a humorless laugh. Turns out when you're suddenly not the mayor's son anymore, just a rich kid whose dad lost everything, you see things differently. Is that why you came to the meeting? Antonio asked. Preston nodded. Partly. Also because NYU rescinded my early admission, said they had concerns about my character and community standing. But if I showed genuine growth and commitment to positive change, they might reconsider for regular admission. Convenient timing for your conscience to kick in, Antonio remarked. Yeah, well, Preston shrugged. Sometimes it takes losing something to realize what matters. He met Antonio's gaze directly for the first time. I'm not asking to be friends. I know I don't deserve that. But I want to help fix what I broke here. Antonio considered him for a long moment. His father would never trust Preston, would see this as a strategic move rather than genuine remorse. But Antonio had seen enough of power games. Sometimes people really did change when their world collapsed around them. Actions matter more than words, Antonio said finally. Show up, do the work, treat people with respect. That's how you start to make things right. Preston nodded. Fair enough. As Preston left, Lynn poked her head into the classroom. Everything okay? Yeah, Antonio said, surprised to find he meant it. I think it might be. That evening, Antonio sat on the dock behind their house, watching the sunset over the lake. His phone buzzed with text from his friends, plans for the weekend, ideas for the council, normal teenage things. For the first time since moving to Westwood, It felt like he truly belonged. He heard footsteps on the dock and turned to see his father approaching, 2 glasses of Italian soda in hand. "Your mother and I used to sit like this at our lake house in Michigan," Dominic said, handing Antonio a glass as he sat beside him. She said water always brought perspective. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors change in the sky. "Preston Thompson joined the Inclusivity Council today," Antonio said finally. "Says he wants to make things right." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "People rarely change their nature." "Maybe," Antonio agreed. "But sometimes they change their perspective." He glanced at his father. "Like you did after we lost Mom." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps," he conceded. "Just be careful. Trust is earned, not given." "I know," Antonio said. "You taught me well." As darkness fell over the lake, Antonio thought about the strange path that had brought him here. His father had built an empire on fear and respect. Antonio was trying to build something different, a world where respect came from understanding, not power. Both approaches had their place. Both had protected him in their own way. But as he looked toward Westwood Prep and the challenges that still lay ahead, Antonio knew which path he would choose, his father's world or his own, the past or the future. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. It was evolution, taking the strength his father had given him and using it to build something new, something better.